Well, girls are being pushed out of their own sports. Women are getting kicked out of rape crisis shelters. Children, confused and vulnerable, are being put on puberty blockers and sent down a path of irreversible damage. And the people who are supposed to protect them, the Democrats, the media, women's rights groups, well, they're nowhere to be found. In fact, they're cheering it on. The so-called trans agenda has become a political steamroller, one that demands you ignore basic biology, shut your mouth, and clap like an idiot while men declare themselves women and take over everything from locker rooms to legislation. But not everyone's going along with it. Our guest today is Cara Dansky. She's a lawyer, author, and longtime feminist activist who TERFed herself right out of a legal career by telling the truth. Cara spent nearly 2 decades working in criminal law and justice policy, including time as senior counsel at the ACLU, before she began calling out the gender identity movement for what it is, a war on women and girls. She's the author of 2 powerful books, The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls, and The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. She writes the TERF Report on Substack, and in 2024, she launched the Democratic Women's Declaration. She's also served on the boards of both the Women's Liberation Front and Women's Declaration International USA. She's here today to talk about how the left lost its mind, what it's costing real people, especially women, and how we fight back. Cara, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so you are a lifelong Democrat. Do you still consider yourself a Democrat, by the way?
I am a registered Democrat, yes.
Still, okay. Even through all of this, which we're going to get into what all of this is, but even through all of this, you're still a Democrat. Still tried and true, you're still trying.
I am still a registered Democrat, which does not give any indication as to how I may or may not vote.
Okay. Let's talk about, so obviously you've written these 2 books about gender identity, transgender issues. When, as a lifelong Democrat, as somebody who's been in the party for a long time, when would you say this shift happened? You know, at what point did it go from, okay, we're looking to advance women, we're trying to continue pushing for women's rights and equality for women. At what point do you feel like the shift really happened and it went towards more of this gender identity and trans issues?
So it's been going on for decades, but 2012 was a pivotal year in the switch to so-called trans. A couple things happened that year. One thing that happened in 2012 is that then Vice President Biden started saying publicly that transgender discrimination is the civil rights issue of our time. 2012 is also the year that a man named Tim McBride decided that he's a woman named Sarah when he was serving as university president or president of the school student association or something like that at American University. Sarah McBride then graduated from American University and went on to secure an internship in the Obama-Biden White House. And 2012 was also the year that President Obama rewrote regulations under the Bureau of Prisons to allow so-called transgender prisoners, by which it meant male prisoners, to be housed in the women's prison. So 2012 was really a pivotal year.
I didn't know it went back that far. It feels like it's more recent, but so from 2012, you think that it kind of ramped up from there, like that's the beginning pivotal point, and then each year it just became a bigger and bigger and bigger issue?
2012 was pivotal, but 2016 was the year that President Obama's Justice Department redefined the word sex to include so-called gender identity via a memo that he wrote, or the Justice Department wrote, to schools all over the country, redefining the word sex to include so-called gender identity under Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. So really, it became much more of a public issue starting around 2015, 2016.
What was the push for this back in 2012? What do you think the impetus was?
So there's a lot of discussion about this, but what drives this really is a combination of money and, to be frank, pornography. The links between pornography and so-called trans have been well documented in the magazine Redux, which is a feminist publication. But to be totally frank about it, it's a money-driven male sexual fetish.
How is it money driven?
There's a tremendous industry that is behind pushing so-called trans. And when you think about it, it's not mysterious, because who benefits from putting an entire generation's worth of children on a lifelong track of hormones? There's pharma, there's medical supply companies, tech plays a huge part in all of this. Silicon Valley plays a huge part in all of this. So it's really an industry-driven male sexual fetish.
Okay, so back in 2012, when Obama says, or where was it Biden? You said Biden at the time as vice president says, this is the civil rights issue of our time.
Yes.
I'm sure there's some, like there's always a grain of truth to everything, right? There's some legitimacy to everything. So what is it that trans people were facing that caused, because it wasn't just Biden saying that and then people go along and say, oh yeah, okay, well, because he said it, it must be. I mean, you have to convince the populace somehow. And there has been the ability to convince quite a few people that that is legitimate, that there is a civil rights issue with trans people. So what is it that they were facing? And I thought about this a lot, especially when the bathroom issue was going on, because I thought, well, no one's preventing them from using a bathroom. It's just which one. I mean, I don't get to have a choice, right? I mean, I'm a woman. Obviously, I walk, I present like a woman. I am a woman, so I go to the women's bathroom. I don't get the option. Really, I'm not supposed to go into the men's room, although I have snuck in there from time to time in the middle, when it's no one's in there and the line is long or whatever, right? But typically the rest of us don't get this choice, right? We just go into the bathroom for our gender. But then there was this group that was saying, well, we want, essentially, I think they're asking for the option to go into either one, and then claiming that is somehow they're being discriminated against because they can't go into either one, when really they would be able to go into either one if they get what they want. I mean, that's why to me it was a bit confusing, because I thought, how is this, how are you're not being excluded, you're asking to be included in either or, essentially.
Yeah.
So
right.
Where do you think there is some legitimacy? I mean, besides people looking at trans people and thinking you're a freak, right? Which is, the personal harm, the personal bullying that the trans people have to go through. Clearly there's that. But is there any legitimacy? I mean, you're an attorney, you've been studying this for a while. Is there any legitimacy to them lacking rights?
No, but also I want to go back a little bit and say that I don't grant that so-called trans people is actually a category of people that are somehow distinct from sex. So often people like me are accused of denying trans people's existence. But what I would say to that is that every single human being, all 8 billion of us everywhere in the world, exists. And we're also all either female or male. So I don't even grant in my books that there is a coherent category of people called, quote unquote, trans. On the rights issue, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is essentially men. When you talk about the bathroom issue, it's men who call themselves women who want to be in women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms, changing rooms, etc. And they do that by claiming to be women. Now, there was a point in time when we understood that if a man, look, I was in a women's bathroom once in a restaurant and I was washing my hands and a man walked in. And as soon as he saw me, he looked absolutely mortified. His face turned red. He turned around and walked out. He had made an honest mistake. No one's angry at that guy.
Right.
But we used to understand that if men intentionally invaded women's intimate spaces where women are maybe in a state of undress or vulnerable, that they could be charged with offenses and forced to leave. But now we live in a time when men can simply invade women's intimate spaces and say, I identify as a woman. And that has literally happened. There's a high school in Wisconsin where some freshman girls were showering in the locker room after gym class. And there was a guy in there and he just literally took his pants off and said, I'm trans, by the way. Oh. That's literally the world we live in now.
Yeah.
But I also, we do have to understand that there are minors who are victims of this. Our Our nation's children are being taught in schools that it's possible to change sex, and there are a lot of young people who are legitimately very confused. Some are just pretending, but some are legitimately confused. And we haven't even touched on the topic of puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones. Right. But there are young people who are being seriously harmed by this.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. But first, I want to kind of get into the psychology of this and where this movement came from and where it's headed and where it's at right now and where it's headed. Because it is interesting that it shifted seemingly so quickly. I mean, going from we're here to help women, and get women to the point where they're equal to men, to suddenly now we're going to help men become women and we have to accept that they're women. There was actually, I was watching this video of a spa. It was like a Korean spa in, I think, the Bay Area. And, a lot of people were championing the woman that was standing behind the desk. And she was like, we're not letting you in. This is a women's only space and you're a man. And he was like, well, I identify as female. It was something along those lines. And she was like, do you have a penis? Then you can't come in. Like, bottom line, if you got a penis, you can't. And it's crazy that it's kind of come down to that, right? Where it's like, really, what genitals do you have? And I guess because maybe, do you think it should come down to that? Because there's some gray areas, right? And this is where it gets really confusing with this issue. Because when I look at somebody, are you familiar with Blair White, for example? Do you know who that is? Yeah. So Blair White presents very female. I look at Blair and I'm like, that's a woman, But I know that Blair has a penis. And Blair is very open about that and said she or he, however you want to refer to Blair, never got bottom surgery, didn't want to get bottom surgery. So Blair's a male with a penis and should not be going into, I guess, the Korean spa where women are walking around naked. And even though Blair looks like a female normally, when Blair takes off their clothes, boobs and a penis. I don't know. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I don't think we should be in a place in society where anyone can lie about sex. And I understand that Blair doesn't lie about his sex. I'll use male pronouns for Blair. Okay. So for me, this is so uncomfortable, right? Like nobody wants to be talking about other people's genitalia. And we shouldn't be in a place in society where we even have to. Right. But for feminists, I'll say, the presence or absence of male genitalia is irrelevant to a question of whether a man is male. Men are male, even if they've had their genitalia removed, or even if they haven't, right? And on the topic of spas, I will just say there was a recent case that came out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. This concerns a Korean spa outside of Seattle. There are others that are happening in the Bay Area, as you say. But the group that I represent, Women's Declaration International, had filed a friend of the court brief, an amicus brief, before the Ninth Circuit. And that brief included the sentence, "It is truly a testament to where we are in society today that it must be said in the context of federal civil rights litigation that women don't have penises." And the brief had to say that because the lower court repeatedly and uncritically used the phrase transgender women with male genitalia. Now, it shouldn't have to be said, but it does, that women don't have male genitalia. And so we've reached the point where we have to say in federal United States courts that women don't have penises. And it's deeply unfortunate that we're at this place, but we are. I wanted to just briefly touch on your question about psychology and how we got here. Yeah. So we Americans and other people in other parts, mainly in the West, have been treated to a media onslaught in which most media outlets will repeatedly and uncritically refer to transgender athletes, transgender prisoners, transgender teachers, transgender students. And so it was a slow, steady psyop, you could say, in a way, where no one really argued out loud that men are women. It was more a slow creep where we've just been indoctrinated to think that this is a coherent category of people.
It is so bizarre. It really, we're at this point. Women don't have penises. And that has to be said. That is really, truly bizarre. Okay, so let's talk about where the Democrat Party is going with this one. Because these Democrats have seemed to, in my opinion, now I'm also somebody I always called myself on the left for a very long time. I felt like, I wouldn't say I was a Democrat ever, but I was definitely progressive or a leftist or, hailing from that side of the aisle. And 2020, COVID for me was really the big shift where I just felt like, wow, okay, we're not actually for science here because I've read the science, I'm watching the science, I'm seeing the science, and the science is saying something very different. And then and maybe a lot of people weren't with me on that one. Maybe they are now, but the trans issue one seems to be even more straightforward. It feels like it should be pretty straightforward. We have genetics, biology, men are men, women are women. And what's really interesting and fascinating to me is the Rachel Dolezal issue. Do you remember that one where she said she was black and she identified as black? She presented as black. She pretended to be black, right? And they just raked her through the coals on that one. They were like, how dare you? This is cultural appropriation. This is, like at Halloween, people aren't allowed to dress up as, people. My little niece, I remember she wanted to be Moana, and she's blonde. My niece is blonde, even though she's actually part Asian, but she's blonde, and because she's like 3/4 white. And the school wouldn't let her wear a wig, like a dark wig, to present as Moana, and they're not letting the kid, like blackface is an issue, which I honestly don't even understand that one. I'm like, if you wanted to be Michael Jordan for Halloween, like, why can't you make yourself look like Michael Jordan for Halloween? Like, stick on the swim cap and paint yourself. And that's not offensive to me. That's just like it's offensive if you're trying to be, like if I show up to a Halloween party and I'm like, what are you? And they're like, I'm an Asian. And then they start doing, making the eyes and doing funny things. And I'm like, oh, okay, now you're just like pretending to be an Asian, which is, that's like, I can understand that being a little bit more offensive. But if somebody says, no, I'm Genghis Khan and I'm behaving a certain way and looking a certain way, I felt like, so they had this moment, right, where they were going through this whole, how dare you culturally appropriate? How dare you? We're all so familiar with this. But then suddenly, it just is okay if a man says, well, now I'm a woman and I'm just declaring myself a woman. And now suddenly, rather than getting the Rachel Dolezal treatment, or rather than getting the Halloween treatment, the Halloween costume treatment, it's just like, oh, no, we have to accept them. We have to open them into all of our spaces, allow them to compete with us in sports, allow them into our prisons where they're impregnating other prisoners. Like, what do you think the shift was on that specific one issue when we were dealing with all of these other cultural appropriation issues prior to this point?
So the shift is unbelievably dramatic, and it's hard to get one's head around, right? Because you're absolutely right about Rachel Dolezal. And also remember, this is on the heels of Me Too, right? In 2017, women were encouraged to talk about their experiences of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And now suddenly all of that is out the window when a man calls himself a woman.
Yeah.
Why that happened, I don't exactly know. I do know that there are a lot of rank and file Democrats, and importantly, former Democrats, who are angry at the party for a variety of reasons. I know someone who, like you, shifted because of COVID. I also know someone who became very angry at congressional Democrats for authoritarian anti-free speech actions.
Right.
So there are a lot of people who are really angry at the Democrats right now for a variety of reasons. This issue happens to be my issue because I'm a lifelong feminist and I care about women and girls as a sex class. But this isn't the only issue that has a lot of people very angry at the Democrats.
But this is a pretty big issue because, like you said, this goes into the actual medical treatment of children. But let's talk about the November 2024 election. You said that every congressional office was sent a copy of your book, Reckoning, and how the Democrats and the left betrayed women and girls. And trying to get Democrats in particular to open up their eyes, I would imagine, to this is an issue that moms are going to care about. Like you're going to piss off the moms when right now what they're dealing with is that their kid goes to school, the school counselor says to the kid, well, you must be trans, right? Like, and then the parents are told you have to affirm this or else you could lose your child.
If they're told at all.
If they're told at all. So tell us about how Democrats responded to your book. Did you get any feedback when you sent this to every congressional office? Did any of the Democrats read it? Did they ever come to you and say, Carey, you're right. We've got to do something about this narrative because this is a losing political battle.
So if I could just back up quickly, in 2021, I published The Abolition of Sex, How the Quote Unquote Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. And that was meant to give ordinary people, mainly on the left, but also on the right, some vocabulary to use in talking about this issue. That was November 2021. By November 2023, or I should say actually early 2023, there was no movement. Democrats were showing no signs of changing course at all. And I thought, all right, if they're not going to change course, what I don't want them to do is just quietly backtrack. I don't want the Democrats who have caused all of this madness and mayhem to just quietly back up and pretend it never happened. And that's why I titled the 2023 book, The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. I want to just say it's not just about the Democrats. It's also about the cultural leftist institutions, including my former employer, the ACLU, as well as the Human Rights Campaign and every big women's organization, the National Organization for Women, Planned Parenthood, the Women's March, the National Center for Lesbian Rights. All of them have completely sold out women and girls. So I place the blame squarely at the feet of the Democrats, although Republicans deserve a little bit. We could talk about that if you'd like. But it's not only the Democratic Party, it's the media, and it's the traditionally so-called progressive organizations that are doing this. And so what I didn't want to happen is I didn't want the Democrats to just quietly walk it back. Did any congressional Democrat get back to us? Absolutely not a single one. And every single House Democrat voted no on the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. 2 House Democrats voted for the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act in January of this year.
Who were those two Democrats?
Those were 2 Democrats in Southern Texas, and I don't remember their names.
Okay.
I don't remember their names at the moment. And the bill, it's called the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. It's a very straightforward bill. It contains 3 paragraphs, and all it would do is define sex accurately under Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. And it fared no better in the Senate than it did in the House. But I will say, at the state level, there's a tiny handful of Democrats who are voting to protect women and girls as a sex class. I'll give a quick shout out to a young man named Jonah Wheeler. He's a staunch Democrat in the New Hampshire House, and he voted in support of women's sex-based rights earlier this year, and he got a ton of pushback from members of his party. But he's not alone. There's a handful of Democrats at the state level who are voting to protect women's sex-based rights and to protect children from harmful hormones and surgeries.
It's just really, it seems like such common sense. But yet, I think the issue is the average voting Democrat as well, right? Like you said, it's a cultural issue, not just the Democratic Party. But on the cultural level, I think, there's so many Democrats I know that if you bring up trans, and if we were to have this conversation, they would just think we're a bunch of bigots, right? They're like, how dare you? You're just closed-minded. You're a bigot. And in reality, what do you think it is that's causing them to go along with this that's obviously anti-science and nonsensical and harmful?
Almost all people think that this is some form of extension of gay. And the Republicans lost colossally on gay marriage. And I completely support gay rights. I completely support my lesbian sisters and gay male brothers. And I would argue that, in fact, trans is homophobic because it denies the material reality of sex. And you cannot protect same-sex attraction in the law if you can't acknowledge that sex is real. And nearly all of the lesbians and gay men that I know and that I associate with are squarely in the same camp. Like, we all know that sex is real. And the organization that I work with, Women's Declaration International, has something called a lesbian caucus, which has written a lesbian bill of rights explaining why so-called gender identity really harms lesbians. But the answer to your question is most people on both the left and the right think this is a form of gay. And that gets us to the really ingenious move, and it gets to what you were asking about earlier in the psychology, the acronym LGBT. It used to be LGB, and then the T got added on, and that was an ingenious move on the part of so-called gender identity. And now we've got various acronyms, depending on who you talk to or what day of the week it is. There might be LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQI, LGBTQIA, LGBTQIA plus 2S.
Right.
You never know. But,
Yeah.
As a friend of mine once said, everything to the right of the B is basically straight people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Most of the gay people I know are also very skeptical of the trans movement, the agenda. They're not in favor of this or on board with it. They're like, this is harming even the gay movement. I mean, they're feeling, and a lot of lesbians in particular, especially butch lesbians, right? Butch lesbians are feeling very under attack because they're being told, you're actually a boy. Right. And they're like, no, I'm a woman. I just happen to be boyish. I happen to be more of a tomboy or butch or however you want to describe me. But I'm a woman and I like being a woman. I just want to be this type of woman. Leave me alone. And they're being told, no, actually, you're a man. And maybe you should just. And then if you were a man, then you would be actually in a heterosexual relationship.
Yep. It's homophobia 2.0. It's no different from 1950s homophobia. Young people in particular, right? Like, most people grow into sexuality in our teenage years. We're starting to explore attraction and all of that stuff. And if young people find themselves being attracted to members of the same sex, if they want to figure out what that is for them, then they're often told that they actually are the opposite sex. And they're told that they have to go on hormones. And they're told that they can change sex.
You know what? That's kind of like the, what is it that they used to do that's been banned? Gay conversion therapy. Doesn't this seem like just like an extreme version of that?
It's exactly gay conversion therapy. And it's more than that, but it is gay conversion therapy. Absolutely.
Like a very extreme form. Like, we're just going to turn you into a different sex and then you won't be gay.
Right.
Jeez. What do we do now with this? I mean, where do you think society? I feel like there's been a big pushback. I feel like there's a lot more, especially on the liberal side of things, the Democrat side of the aisle. A lot more people speaking up saying, I'm fed up with this. We're not going to go down this road. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to transition my children. My 12-year-old comes to me and says they feel like a boy or they feel like a girl. Like, just ignore. I want to ignore that just like I would any other phase that they go through if they came to me, because 12-year-olds are confused, 15-year-olds are confused, 16-year-olds are trying to fit. There's like, can we just not be forced to actually have to medicate our children? And so I think there's definitely, do you feel like there is momentum going in your side on this?
Yeah. So I attended a rally outside of the Supreme Court in 2019 during oral arguments in a case that involved this issue. And at that time, in 2019, it was basically myself and a tiny handful of other lefty radical feminists surrounded by a bunch of arch conservatives, right? And we were on the same side on this issue. But in December, there was another Supreme Court case involving this issue generally. And there was a rally outside the Supreme Court that I attended. It was filled with all sorts of people on the political left. There's an organization called the LGB Courage Coalition. They were there in force. They had signs that said, stop transing gay kids, to the point that we were just discussing. Yeah. There's a group called Our Duty. There's a woman named Erin Friday, who is a lifelong Democrat on the political left, and she represents the group Our Duty. She held signs that said Democrats against puberty blockers. So there's a ton of movement on the political left to protect our kids and to protect women's sex-based rights. So I am very confident in the American electorate and in the electorates of other Western countries that we're going in the right direction in this. I have almost no faith in congressional Democrats, however, because if they were going to do anything, they would have done it this year on the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. I'm not giving up on state Democrats because, again, a lot of them have voted, in my view, in the right way. But I'm very quickly giving up hope in nationally known and congressional Democrats.
What do you think's motivating the congressional Democrats? Do you think it's the lobby? Is it money, like you mentioned at the beginning of this? Is it money focused, or are they afraid of the voters?
Well, if they're afraid of the voters, then they need to change their tune because, as we've been discussing, the voters are going in a different direction, and they showed it in November 2024. We know that just behind immigration and inflation, this issue played a role, right? That ad, Kamala Harris is for they, them, President Trump is for you. I will tell you, I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time, and those ads notoriously played during football games. And I might lose my radical feminist card over this, but I watch American football. And I was watching a game at a restaurant, and I saw that ad, and I nearly fell out of my chair. I thought, that's it. Like, that's the election. And it was. This issue definitely played a role. So if congressional Democrats are worried about voters, then they need to get on board. They need to change their tune. But I do think it's money. I think there's something about a sunk cost fallacy going on here. They are so all in on this that it's very difficult to walk it back. But they could do it if they wanted to. A lot of high profile Democrats, including Biden, including Hillary Clinton, including Obama, backtracked on same-sex marriage. They were all opposed to it until they weren't. They came out, they said, I've changed my mind, I apologize, I got it wrong, and now I'm going to get it right. They did it on that. They can do it on this.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier that the GOP also contributed to this problem, that it's mostly the left, it's mostly liberals, but in what way did Republicans also contribute to this?
They were very slow to the issue. First of all, I will say, as I mentioned, everyone seems to be convinced that trans is a form of gay, and that includes many Republicans. And as I mentioned, Republicans lost so colossally on same-sex marriage, they were very reluctant to get into this because they didn't want to come across as, homophobic bigot.
Right, okay.
Right. So they were very slow to this. And some Republicans, including Texas Governor Abbott, have received money from so-called gender clinics. That's public knowledge. It's on the record. So I do think that the GOP plays some role in this. And I will say that hearing from some of my Republican friends who are just as angry at their own party as I am at mine. And conservative media is not a whole lot better. Fox News will also run stories saying transgender athlete, this and that and the other thing. They are part of what caused everyone to just seem to accept that this is a civil rights movement, which it is not.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of liberals just latched onto this because conservatives were against trans. So it's like, well, because conservatives are against gays and trans, we have to be for gays and trans, no matter what, right? Like even if I don't fully understand it and I don't know where it's headed, there's just sort of that natural reaction. And both sides do that, right? I mean, the Republicans will be against something just simply because liberals are for it and vice versa. I mean, just that political team sporting, which is terrible. But it does feel like a lot of these movements were born and bred and really reared their ugly heads, mostly because people just wanted to be against whatever the right was for. Just, whatever. Yeah. If they don't like trans, so then I'm going to be super for trans, and I don't even know what the issue is. I don't care. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to be for it. And I think that's one of the big problems there. I think there's a lot to that. I also think there's something about this issue that is so unbelievable that it's really legitimately difficult to believe that this is happening. I think it is an absolute national scandal that the mainstream legacy media outlets are not reporting on the fact that states are allowing male convicted rapists and murderers to be housed in women's prisons. And we know that
Some of these men are raping women. They're held in locked cells with vulnerable women, some of the most vulnerable women in our society, many of whom already in their lives have been subjected to male physical and sexual violence. And I cannot get the New York Times to report on it. I cannot get the Washington Post to report on it. It's an absolute scandal. But when you talk to average, ordinary Democrats, it's so difficult to believe that's even happening because they receive a steady stream of MSNBC and NBC and the New York Times, et cetera, which aren't telling them.
Well, one thing that, I'll admit that even for me, when I first heard about this issue, I actually heard about it mostly from the right. The right was kind of screaming about it. And I just thought, this is like, to me, the racism issue, which maybe you don't agree with me on this one. I don't know. But for me, I just felt like, the left made such a big deal about racism. They just kept saying racism everywhere, racism, racism. And here I am. I'm a person who's mixed race, who grew up in the state of Idaho, of all places. And I never really experienced, it wasn't top of my mind. I just don't think it's at the top of my family's mind or anybody's mind. It was just like, but they treated it like we walked out our front door and we just were hit with racism, and that was like our number one issue. And really, it was like, no, our number one issue is paying our bills, like anybody else, or crime, like anybody else. We don't want to be robbed, and we just want to be able to afford, a middle class life. Like that's what we want. But they went overboard with it. And so when I started hearing about the trans issue from the right, I felt like, oh, you guys are okay. So this is just what this is again. Talking about the children, they're coming after the kids, they're transitioning the kids, they're doing all this with the kids, and I just thought, how often is this actually happening that you guys are screaming about this, where it's like constant chatter on the particularly cultural right podcasts, constantly talking about this. And I just thought, you guys are making a mountain out of a molehill. And I really believed that until, because I thought, how many people do I know that are actually going through this? Until I met a lot of people actually going through this, until a lot of my friends who have kids that are now in their teens and 20s, when it came down to me personally knowing 4 people who had kids that were transitioning, then I was like, okay, wait a minute. It'd be weird to know 1, let alone 2, 3, or 4. So maybe this is a much bigger issue than even I thought. And versus like the racism issue, for example, most of the people I know of color, we have to think hard about the last time we dealt with a racism issue. We're like, when was the last time somebody was really racist toward you? I have to like really think about it. But for the which is even crazier because it seems like you deal with that a lot more because it's a lot easier for somebody to just say a slur than it would be to transition your kid. But it seems like that's actually happening a lot more. And so this truly is a huge issue that, this isn't like a one-off, but it's hard to believe. It's hard, like I said, I sat there and I was like, I don't believe it. Who's this happening to? Who's this really happening to? But it's actually happening all the time, constantly, nonstop.
Yeah. It's all very difficult to believe, but I will also just say that for parents who are going through this, there are some parents who are very deliberately trying to quote unquote transition their children. And I think that's horrible. But there's a much larger contingent of parents who are desperately trying to save their children from this. And it's agonizing for them because they can't really speak about it because their children are minors and they're desperately trying to save their kids. They're desperately trying to save their families. And it's just horrific. So I just want to put in a plug for a Substack newsletter called Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans. These are parents who are just going through absolute agony. A lot of them are in custody battles with their exes. It's really hard. It's really hard for them.
Okay, I have a couple more questions for you. First of all, how do we talk to our Democrat friends and family who think that we're just bigots? If we start saying stuff like this, they're going to be like, you are just a closed-minded bigot. How do we talk to them about this in a way that convinces them?
I think just an introductory question, like, can we have this conversation? Can we talk about this issue? And then I would just encourage people to have really straightforward conversations using very clear language. Don't hesitate to say there are male convicted prisoners being housed in women's prisons. What do you think about that? Do you think that's okay? Do you think it's okay for men to be in women's bathrooms with little girls. What do you really think? Tell me, be honest. What do you really, really think? Don't tell me what you think you have to say. Tell me what you honestly think about it.
Yeah, right. And I think most people they're not thinking of the nuanced details like that. They're just thinking, I want to accept everybody, to each their own. Everybody live their life the way they want to live their life. Fine, right? But they're not realizing that this goes beyond that. This is actually impactful in other ways. And this is impacting little girls, women, children, right? This is impacting people. Okay, two more questions. I had one more, but actually I have one more. I have one more. Go ahead, yeah.
Can I say quickly one more thing? Just on the topic of go ahead and live your life the way you want to, sure, fair enough, right? I'm a lefty, live your life how you want to.
Sure.
And I do just want to quickly say, like, don't conform to sex stereotypes if you don't want to. Cool.
Right.
If you're a woman and you want to have short hair, that's awesome. But there is another segment of society that doesn't get talked about very frequently. They're referred to as trans widows. These are the wives and partners of the men who decide they're women, and they go through a lot. So I don't want to just say, do what you want to do in your own bedroom, because there are women who are partnered with men, right, who call themselves women, and they deal with a lot of stuff too.
Well, and the children, and there's a lot of, I mean, even when Caitlyn Jenner came out, and decided to present as female, he even said to his kids, they were like, well, what do we call you? And he's like, Dad. You still call me Dad. You've always been calling me Dad. Just call me Dad, right? I mean, but it can be confusing, I think, for everybody involved. What about, sorry, I had one more question, which is a big one, which is what can we do now? What can we all do to kind of raise awareness of this or put a stop to it or help enact laws? But before I do that one, before we get to like the big one, what about, we've kind of focused on the trans men, like the men who are presenting as women, pretending to be women. But what about the women who want to be men? Like what, and they're, what's interesting about sports, I think a lot of people don't realize this, is that there's actually no ban on, not that I know of any sport that bans women from participating in the men's sports, right? So like women can play in the NFL, women can play in the NBA, women can play in all the sports. It's just whether or not women can compete against the men to actually do it. That's very, very rare to have a woman actually qualify and be good enough to play with the men in the NBA. So that's why we don't allow men into the women's sports, but women are actually allowed in the men's sports. But what about women presenting as male and wanting to go into the men's locker rooms? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when it comes to sports, there's such a thing as doping. And I don't think that women ought to be able to be on testosterone. They're just normal doping rules, right? Like you're just not allowed to cheat by doping. But it's no secret that becoming a woman can be challenging, right? Our bodies change and men start to look at us differently, and
it's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. And a lot of women, young women, I'm speaking specifically about the category of women who are called detransitioners. These are women who took hormones, and many of them had surgeries to remove their healthy breasts because they wanted to be men. And a lot of them will say that they had experienced sexual assault, they had watched a lot of porn. They look at society and how women are treated in society, and they think to themselves, well, I don't want to be treated like that. Yeah. So they're basically opting out of womanhood, which is really sad. And a lot of them honestly believe, because they're told by psychiatrists and medical doctors, that they can become men. And they think, well, that's cool. It's better to be a man than a woman. So that's why a lot of them are doing this. And it's tragic.
That is tragic. But I do think you're right. The rise of social media, Instagram, the airbrushing, the perfect looking girls, it is very uncomfortable for a woman, for all of us, I think every one of us, when we went through puberty. How uncomfortable was that? And how uncomfortable was it when we had the sudden realization as we went through puberty that, wait a minute, men are looking at us now. When you're young, you don't think about that. When you're prepubescent, it's like not a thought in your mind. But then suddenly it kind of hits us like, wait a minute, they're looking at me. And it's kind of uncomfortable and weird. Like they're looking at me in a way that I didn't really, what is that? That's weird. That's uncomfortable. Worrying about our safety all the time. You know, how many of us lace keys in between our fingers when we're walking through a dark parking lot? You know, how many of us think about our high heels as a weapon or check the back seat of the car when we get in? You know, we have to do all of these extra things as women and always have to guard ourselves and protect because we do have an extra layer of violence against us, which is rape. And that is something that men do deal with, but not nearly as much as women do. And so we have these, you know, and just lust and, like you said, pornography and how degrading it is, you know, against women. And there is just a lot there. So it is really sad that these young girls, rather than just facing womanhood and the challenges and the benefits and how wonderful womanhood can be, rather than dealing with that, they'd rather just say, you know what, I opt out, I'd rather be a boy. I can see how that's happening. And that's really, really unfortunate. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, so the big question, what do we do? What can we do?
So, first of all, thank you for having this interview, because what we need to do is get this into the media. I cannot tell you how many op-eds I have drafted for the New York Times and Washington Post that go completely ignored. I recently was able to get an op-ed in the outlet The Hill talking about a recent meeting in Congress where a Democratic congressman's chief of staff treated women horribly, mocked a sexual abuse survivor, accused these women of lying. These are feminists. These are mostly Democrats and left-leaning women, and the Democrats in Congress are treating them terribly. So I was happy to get that op-ed in The Hill. But we've got to get this issue in the media, because otherwise, as you said, our Democrat friends and families do not understand what's going on because no one tells them. No one has honest conversations with them. And, you know, how would they know if all they get is a steady stream of MSNBC telling them that trans is a civil rights movement? That's what they're going to think.
Right.
So I'm just going to keep on my mission of trying to get in the media. I often say, if we can be heard, we will win.
And nobody wants to be a bigot. I mean, that's, you know, even bigots don't want to be bigots. Nobody thinks they are, but nobody really wants to be. I mean, I think we all want to accept people, and there are, and I think it's important to mention, there are people who genuinely suffer from gender identity crisis. Like, they just genuinely have a gender identity confusion, and they're born with this, or it develops when they're very young. And it is a very tragic thing, I think, for a person to have to deal with. I am so grateful I don't have to deal with that. But it is real for some people. And it's not a cultural thing or young kids being confused or trendy or anything like that. There's a genuine mental illness that people suffer from. And we should be sensitive, and we should take care and concern for these individuals and do what we can to not traumatize them. I mean, I myself have some friends who are genuinely trans. They've been trans since they were very little. And, you know, even though they know that I think they're male, I still, when I'm with them as a friend, you know, I try to be sensitive and you know, I'm not looking to traumatize them or harm them. I just also don't think that they should be allowed in the women's prisons or in women's sports, but they agree actually on that. They also don't think they should be playing in women's sports or being in women's prisons, right? So, I mean, the people that, and that's another thing to bring up, is a lot of trans do agree with you on this issue. This is not just us against trans. There's a lot of trans people that are on the side of, hey, common sense on this. We're suffering. We don't need to be adding or, you know, forcing everybody to live in our delusion. We have a delusion. We don't need you to be participating in that. So, you know, there is that, but at the same time, we can't harm all of ourselves in helping somebody else through their problems, right? It's kind of like the oxygen mask on the airplane.
Right. So, I mean, again, going back to the beginning, I wouldn't even grant that trans is a coherent category of people, but I agree with you that there are people who are legitimately confused. And when someone says to me, well, why can't you just be kind and compassionate? I genuinely think that the kindest thing and the most compassionate thing we can do for anyone who is genuinely confused about their sex is to help them accept themselves as the sex that they are. Again, gender nonconform all you want. Be David Bowie, you know? Like, if you're a dude and you want to wear a flamboyant dress, go for it. I remember walking down the street in Washington, D.C., and I saw this gay male couple. They were holding hands. One was dressed in a stereotypical male fashion. The other was wearing a stereotypical male button-down shirt and a long flowy skirt. Cool, right? Like,
Do you
bothering anybody?
Right?
You know, like that's great, but just don't lie about your sex.
Sure. No, I agree with you. Let me say, I agree. I agree that this is not a category of people. That this is in my mind, it's a mental illness, and that does not define. I don't want to be defined by my mental illnesses or anybody, if I have any, or somebody else. I don't think people should be defined by their mental illnesses, like, oh, bipolar people or whatever, or depressed people, or, that's not a group of people. It's a person who suffers from a certain ailment. It's not, cancer people, for example, right? It's a person with cancer. And so I think that's a distinction you're making, is that there might be people who suffer from this mentally, but this is not a category of people.
Right. I mean, again, all 8 billion of us human beings on this planet exist, and we're all either female or male.
Yeah. Okay.
And that matters. It matters if you care about women and girls as a sex class. And it matters for a whole host of other reasons that we don't even have time to get into. Like, how can you have legitimate public health research if you can't acknowledge the material reality of sex? Yeah. Drugs affect our bodies differently. Diseases affect our bodies differently. I don't know how the CDC can do its work if it doesn't acknowledge the material reality of sex.
It is bizarre, and there have been definitely some bizarre ramifications from this confusion, this kind of collective confusion our society seems to be dealing with. But we need to become unconfused, and hopefully very quickly. And it's been now over 10 years. It started in 2012. We're now, 13 years in? Let's not go 14 or 15 years. And I actually think that there is a shift happening. I think there's a big shift happening. And I think a lot of us who even sort of tiptoed around the subject, and I know I certainly did at first, kind of tiptoed, but now, I also, if the person is male, like Caitlin, I say he, I just, that's a man. And however he wants to be, if he wants to go by a different name, fine. I don't really care, because like Kim, my name in Denmark is a male's name. I don't care, right? It doesn't really, that part to me doesn't matter, but you are still who you are. If you want to wear a dress, you want to put on some lipstick, you want to change your name, fine. By all means, do what you want to do, but it doesn't change reality. It doesn't change science.
Yeah. For those of us who grew up in the 80s, we grew up with David Bowie and Annie Lennox breaking gender norms all the time. That's great.
Yeah, it was totally normal. It was okay. All right. So the book is The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. I do have the link down below to that book, as well as to The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. Which one would you say people should get? I mean, both. What like, should they start with the first one, The Abolition of Sex? Because you said that would help people maybe talk to other people. And I think that's kind of a big thing people really need.
The Abolition of Sex is an introduction to the topic, and it's a very short read. The Reckoning is much longer, but it's filled with all sorts of information. And so if you're talking about wanting to talk with your Democrat friends and family, The Reckoning begins with a preface called A Note to American Democratic Women, I think is what the preface is called. And it just gives some tips for how to talk to people about this. So definitely, if you want to understand how the Democrats and the left betrayed women and girls, you want The Reckoning. But The Abolition of Sex is a super quick read. Okay.
All right. Well, we do have the links down below. Cara, and also a link to your X for people to follow you. There. And I think, thank you so much, Cara. This has been thanks for your work and being brave on this. I know it's really tough to go against the grain, to go against, the group that you've been a part of. And it can be very isolating and lonely. And you're very brave for doing it.
I will tell you that I have made a lot more friends than I have lost since talking about this.
Well, that is great. Cara, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. We do live stream it every day. It's a 1-hour show. You can catch it. It is totally free. Just go to KimIversonShow.com. See you there.